Nothing we say is investment advice. Please pause on all 3 pages of this disclaimer and read it. Greetings, Algo Artisans. Nick here. It is Monday, August 25th. We're going to do the weekly market forecast. And as usual, we're going to take a look at the NASDAQ, USDJPY, BTCUSD, that's Bitcoin, EURUSD, AUDUSD, GBPJPY, and gold. A little bit of information from last week. Jerome Powell said something kind of dovish, meaning that the markets liked it on Friday at Jackson Hole. We'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes, but that did cause a massive move up in a lot of markets, including the NASDAQ, but that does seem to be wearing off. So before we get too deep into that, let's go ahead and take a look at the economic data that's going to be announced this week and how that might affect the charts. Now, it's going to be a pretty quiet week. Today was quiet for the British pound as it was on a bank holiday. No data really came out today. Tomorrow at 2:30 p.m. EST, Bank of Canada, Governor Macklem speaks. We have some Aussie news at 9:30 p.m. EST. Their CPI comes out. Nothing on Wednesday. Thursday, the usual suspects. Prelim GDP quarter over quarter for USD, which is not necessarily a usual suspect, but the unemployment claims is every week at 8:30 a.m. EST, moving the dollar markets around. Friday, again, not a lot of news. We have some Canadian data coming out, 8:30 a.m. EST. Their GDP comes out, and some U.S. inflation data. Now, that data on Friday at 8:30 a.m. EST, the core PCE price index for U.S. inflation might move markets, but besides that, there's not a lot going on this week. So let's go ahead and jump into the charts, and we'll start with the NASDAQ. All right, so that big move up on Friday was from Jerome Powell saying that they are not going to focus on the 2% inflation target anymore. Now, everybody seems to think that that all was just something that's been around forever and the Fed was always doing this, and that is not the case. The 2% target was maybe 13 years ago, put in place by Bernanke, and removing it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to see a huge difference in the way things are being done. The market did think that was the case. The stocks pumped, a lot of things moved up, and now they've kind of stalled out for today, right? So the NASDAQ does have a little bit of bullish momentum, and it is in fact the NASDAQ. So of course markets must go up in the absence of a reason to go down, and it does appear that prices will probably grind up this week outside of any surprises coming from the data we talked about or any headlines. And I do expect the NASDAQ not to break 24,000, which is the all-time high put in back on the 13th of August. It could happen, it's always possible, but the upper bound is that, and the lower bound for price is probably going to be about 23,000. So between 23 and 24, I expect price to just grind about. I don't expect it to necessarily touch either of those, but just a slow grind up and to the right. Let's take a look at USDJPY. Another range-bound instrument here. This currency pair seems to be stuck between 146.57 yen and roughly 148.50, 148.80 yen. The move on Friday down was, of course, in response to Powell. Price is already coming all the way back up, but the volatility is pretty low. The dollar and the US have an interesting relationship when it comes to the stock market, and the stock market itself is trying to decide what it wants to do. So this may just continue to grind with an upper bound at 148.75, 77, and a lower bound is probably going to be 146.55, and at the lowest it would be 146.22. I don't think price will hit either of those bounds. If it were to hit one of them, I would say in the next few days it might be 148.77, but of course that is all in the absence of major news that we are not expecting or some data to come out very, very off from what we talked about earlier. Let's take a look at Bitcoin. A lot of people are worried about Bitcoin. They think the bull market may be over, and it may be over. Just remember that it is Bitcoin. We've seen price grinding down since the all-time high back on the 13th of August, and I have been pretty bearish overall, but there were some interesting movements in price, some large players selling a bunch of Bitcoin into the market, causing kind of a hard crash earlier on Sunday, like a $4,000 move down right here, and a lot of people think it's the end of the bull, and it may well be, but we have a couple things to look at here where that might not be the case. Let's talk about what I think price may do, and then we'll talk about some of the mechanics. So spend a little bit more time on Bitcoin today, but not a whole lot of time. The liquidity, according to the Kingfisher, is in these boxes. Now, there's a lot more liquidity up top here between 114.750 or so, and the top of this box here at 119. A lot of liquidity in there. Price does want to eventually get there as long as that liquidity stays there. However, if price continues down, that liquidity will go away as those trades are exited to the profitable side, because those are shorts. If the shorts exit, exit, then those stop losses and liquidations will go away. A little bit of liquidity down here around 106,000 and 104,600. My opinion is if Bitcoin can stay above 108,000, that's pretty strong. Even above 103,000 is still pretty strong. And there is some liquidity down at 104, 106. And of course, that moves around on an hour-to-hour, day-to-day, and technically a minute-to-minute basis. So we might be scaring out some of the bears before price goes up. The absolute must bounce, I think, for any kind of midterm move up is going to be 98,000. And I think it's going to be tough to push it below 100,000. Not to say it's impossible. I'm not going to worry about that just yet. Just understand that the midterm algos are a bit bearish. And I say midterm, I mean over the next few days, maybe the next week or two. There's a fair amount of bearishness. This is Bitcoin. Perhaps in early September, mid-September, we get a cut in the rates and all of a sudden this thing spikes up. That could happen, or it could just simply spike up on its own to grab liquidity. I wouldn't count Bitcoin out just yet, but I would understand that the very bottom of the range for my personal call on where the bull market could end was 125,000 or so. And it hit 124,500. Now, my whole range for the bull market was between 125 and 160. In fact, I should take that back. I believe it was 120,000, but I had a target around 125. Very long story short, it has pierced my bull market minimum. The top could possibly be in by my own metrics, and I think that the sweet spot's around 145,000. I think 145 is the most likely top we will see, and there is plenty of time left in the year. The bull market usually doesn't end right now, but it could. I'm going to keep an eye on the algos, update you weekly, and at 8:30 a.m. EST, Tuesday through Thursday, we go in and refine our look on these targets and prices and price predictions as well. Let's move on to EURUSD. Big move down on the euro. I was grinding on that one all day long. I do think we're going to see it continue to grind down, but as it continues towards the bottom of this range, we'll probably see some kind of a bounce. Might happen before, might happen right at it. The bottom of that range is 115.88. The top of the range is 117.430. I think price, like I said, will just grind down. It may shoot down sooner. It might bounce up and grab liquidity to go down. That all remains to be seen. But in the end, I see down and to the right. For the moment, there is a bit of a structure shelf at 115.28. I expect that to be a bounce on the way down. Let's take a look at AUDUSD. Not a lot going on with this pair. I do expect this to grind sideways mostly. I don't expect a lot out of this pair just because the algos are sort of indecisive. It is range bound more or less between about 65, 69 all the way down to 64.13. And I don't expect price to even touch those bounds. I expect it to simply grind sideways until we see something else happen in the market, and that's that. Let's look at GBPJPY, aka the beast. Another grinding range bound, and I would even take this farther and say it's coiling, right? I think this is coiling. Now, the local high and local low are sitting at 199.30 as the high and 198.32 as the low. I don't expect price to touch either of those. I expect price to just kind of grind unless there's some kind of news. I expect it to grind sideways until the end of the week. Now, if there's news or if the bulls and the bears have finally figured out who's going to win, we might see price go up towards those bounds. We'll see if that happens and when. Not going to worry about it until the algos call it out. Let's take a look at gold. So gold, another range-bound asset. We have the bottom of a range around 33.10 for the near term. Now the higher term range really is a bit wider. It's going to be more like 32.40 and the top of the range is going to be more like 34.51. However, that is such a high time frame range that I don't expect those to be touched at all. The local high is about 3400 and the local low is 32.68 and the more local low is going to be 33.11. I would expect price to possibly touch this 33 number if it doesn't just simply grind sideways in a much tighter pattern, but I don't expect a whole lot out of gold, not even until quarter 4 begins. So, sometime in September maybe, so that's the end of quarter 3. But right now, I don't expect a lot. Now, gold will do things when you don't expect it, so we have to watch out for that, but in the end, I think it will remain range bound either in the tighter range or the broader range. So, quiet week as it is. Of course, we expected last week to be quiet outside of Jackson Hole, and quiet it was indeed. In the meantime, what we do is we help people learn how to build their own trading plan, how to build a method by which they can predict to a statistical degree of accuracy whether or not price will go up or down and where it will go. And when you have that information on lock, you can extract money from the market on a regular basis in a predictable fashion. So come on over to algofactory.tech. Go into the description, get the free algo. There's a link in there. You'll see how I build a simple algo. If you really know what you're doing, you could optimize it. But then again, if you really know what you're doing, you may or may not need my help. Now, trading is multi-dimensional, there's building the algo, there's the psychological aspect of trading, and then of course there is the treating it like a business. And if you do not know one of these things, you can know the other two, but if you do not know one of these things, the probability is extremely high that you will not be successful trading. If you want to be so, go ahead, get the free algo, we'll put you on a list, we'll send you our information, join algofactory.tech, learn how to trade like a hedge fund pro, take your financial future into your hands. We will see you on Tuesday morning, 8:30 a.m. EST, and thank you for watching.